500 years ago, the place where the White House now stands didn't have a name. No government, no flag, no army, just land, untouched, unclaimed by any European map. And yet, in less than 250 years, that same land would produce the most powerful military, the most powerful economy, and the most influential culture the world has ever seen. This is not a story of one hero. It's a story of religious outcasts, tax rebels, enslaved millions, war generals, and a handful of men who wrote a piece of paper so dangerous it started a revolution. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how a scattered group of colonies became a global superpower, and why the fingerprints of that transformation are still shaping the world today. Let's go back to the very beginning. Here's what most people get wrong. Christopher Columbus did not discover America. He never even set foot on the mainland. He landed in the Caribbean, convinced he'd reached Asia, and he died still believing that lie. But here's the part textbooks often skip. When Europeans arrived, this land was not empty. It was home to hundreds of distinct indigenous nations: the Iroquois Confederacy, the Cherokee, the Sioux, the Powhatan, with their own languages, governments, trade networks, and histories stretching back over 15,000 years. The arrival of Europeans wasn't a discovery, it was a collision. Diseases like smallpox wiped out an estimated 90% of the indigenous population within a century, faster and more devastating than any war in human history. So before we celebrate the birth of a new nation, we have to be honest. This story starts with one of the greatest tragedies in human history.
Starting in the early 1600s, a wave of migration began. But these weren't tourists, they were people running from something. Some fled poverty, some fled religious persecution. The most famous group, the Pilgrims, boarded a small, cramped ship called the Mayflower in 1620 because England wouldn't let them worship the way they wanted. Over the next century, 13 British colonies formed along the eastern coast: Massachusetts, Virginia, New York, Pennsylvania, and more. Each one had its own economy, its own laws, its own culture. Virginia grew tobacco using enslaved labor. Massachusetts built trade and shipping empires. Pennsylvania became a haven for religious tolerance. But all 13 colonies shared one uncomfortable truth. Every single decision about their lives, taxes, laws, trade, was being made by a king sitting thousands of miles away in London. And that distance was about to become a problem.
After a brutal and expensive war with France, Britain needed money, and they decided the colonies should pay for it. Tax after tax rolled in. A tax on sugar, a tax on paper, a tax on tea, a tax on almost everything colonists touched. The colonists didn't just get angry about the money. They got angry about a principle. Their rallying cry became one of the most famous phrases in American history: "No taxation without representation." Translation: you're taking our money, but you won't give us a single seat in your parliament to have a say. Tensions exploded in December 1773 when a group of colonists disguised themselves and boarded British ships in Boston Harbor, dumping 342 chests of British tea straight into the water. We call it the Boston Tea Party. Britain called it an act of treason. Either way, there was no turning back now. By 1775, words turned into gunfire. At Lexington and Concord, colonial militias, untrained farmers with muskets, clashed with the most powerful army on earth. Nobody knows who fired the first shot, but it didn't matter anymore. The American Revolutionary War had officially begun. For 8 brutal years, colonial soldiers, underfed, underpaid, and outgunned, fought British redcoats across forests, rivers, and frozen winter camps like Valley Forge, where soldiers marched barefoot in the snow. But the Americans had 2 advantages the British didn't. They knew the terrain, and they had nothing left to lose. And then a turning point. France, Britain's bitter rival, decided to back the Americans with money, weapons, and a navy. In 1781, at Yorktown, the British Army was surrounded and forced to surrender. The impossible had happened. A ragtag group of colonies had defeated the most powerful empire on the planet.
But before the war even ended, something even more revolutionary happened. On July 4, 1776, representatives from all 13 colonies gathered and signed a document that would outlive empires, the Declaration of Independence. Its central idea was radical for its time. All men are created equal in an era of kings and absolute monarchs, a group of colonists just declared that power belongs to the people, not to a crown. Of course, we have to be honest about the contradiction. The man who wrote those words, Thomas Jefferson, owned enslaved people himself. The promise of all men are created equal would take centuries and a civil war to even begin to apply to everyone. But the idea itself, it was a spark that would inspire revolutions across the entire world for the next 250 years.
Winning the war was one thing. Building an actual functioning country was another problem entirely. And history is full of new nations that either collapsed or fell into the hands of a dictator. At first, America nearly did both. The initial government, under the Articles of Confederation, was so weak it could barely function. No real power to tax, no unified military, no way to enforce laws. So in 1787, delegates met again in Philadelphia and wrote a new founding document, the United States Constitution. This time, they built something genuinely new, a government split into 3 separate branches: legislative, executive, and judicial, each one able to check and limit the other's power. Why does this matter? Because for the first time in history, a major nation declared that no single person, not even the president, would be above the law. And then George Washington did something almost unheard of for a victorious general. After 2 terms as president, he simply walked away from power, when he could have easily stayed for life. That one decision set the tone for American democracy for the next 2.5 centuries.
With independence secured, America turned its eyes towards something enormous: expansion. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson made one of the biggest real estate deals in human history, the Louisiana Purchase, buying 828,000 square miles of land from France for roughly 4 cents an acre. Overnight, the size of the country doubled. But westward expansion wasn't an empty adventure story. It meant broken treaties, forced removals like the Trail of Tears, and violent conflict with the indigenous nations who had lived on that land for thousands of years. It also meant a gold rush that pulled hundreds of thousands of settlers to California almost overnight, and the construction of a transcontinental railroad, built largely by immigrant labor, especially Chinese workers, who faced brutal conditions and discrimination. By the mid-1800s, this once tiny strip of coastal colonies now stretched from the Atlantic to the Pacific. But that expansion exposed a deep, violent contradiction sitting at the heart of the country. By the 1860s, America was living a lie. A country built on the words "all men are created equal" had nearly 4 million enslaved people, primarily in its southern states. When Abraham Lincoln was elected president in 1860, 11 southern states seceded rather than accept any threat to slavery, forming the Confederacy. What followed was the deadliest war in American history, the Civil War. Over 600,000 soldiers died, more American deaths than World War I and World War II combined. In 1863, Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring enslaved people in Confederate states free. 2 years later, the Union won. Slavery was formally abolished through the 13th Amendment, and the country began the long, painful, unfinished process of trying to become what it had claimed to be since 1776.
After the Civil War, America transformed at a dizzying speed. Railroads crisscrossed the continent. Oil, steel, and electricity created new empires almost overnight. Names like Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Edison became symbols of unimaginable wealth, while millions of factory workers, including children, labored in dangerous conditions for pennies. Waves of immigrants from Ireland, Italy, Germany, Eastern Europe, and China poured through places like Ellis Island, drawn by the promise of opportunity, fueling the workforce of the fastest industrializing economy on Earth. By the early 1900s, the United States had quietly become the largest industrial economy in the entire world, even before most of the globe realized it had happened.
For decades, America tried to stay out of Europe's conflicts. That changed twice. In World War I, American entry in 1917 helped tip the balance and end a war that had already killed millions. But it was World War II that truly rewrote America's role in the world. After the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the United States mobilized its entire economy for war. Factories that once built cars now built tanks and bombers almost overnight. By 1945, America emerged from the war not just victorious, but as one of only two global superpowers, alongside the Soviet Union, its economy untouched by the destruction that had leveled much of Europe and Asia. The world had changed, and America's place in it had changed forever.
With the war over, a new kind of conflict began. One fought not with soldiers on a battlefield, but with ideology, spies, and the constant threat of nuclear annihilation. The Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. This rivalry pushed America to do things that once seemed like science fiction. In 1969, fueled partly by the desperate need to beat the Soviets, the United States landed astronauts on the surface of the moon, a moment watched by roughly 600 million people worldwide. At home, the same decades brought the civil rights movement, as Americans fought to finally deliver on that 1776 promise that all people truly are created equal, challenging segregation and discrimination through marches, courtrooms, and enormous personal sacrifice.
Fast forward to today, and the numbers are almost hard to believe. The United States has the largest economy on the planet. Its currency, the dollar, is the backbone of global trade. Its culture, movies, music, technology, social media, reaches nearly every corner of the world. Companies born in American garages and dorm rooms now shape how billions of people communicate, shop, and think. And yet, the same country still wrestles with the same core tension it was born with in 1776, the gap between the ideals written on that founding document and the reality of living up to them. That tension between promise and practice isn't a flaw in the American story. It is the American story.
So the next time you see that flag, remember what's actually behind it. Religious refugees on a cramped wooden ship, a chest of tea dumped into a harbor, a piece of paper that dared to say people are born free, a war that nearly tore the country in half, and a promise that's still being written generation after generation. This isn't just the story of one country. It's proof of how fast history can move when enough people decide the old rules no longer apply. If this journey through history blew your mind, hit subscribe, because next time we're breaking down the rise and fall of another empire that changed the world forever.